Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Thursday, April 3rd, 2025 agenda meeting of the Minnesota Public Utilities Commission. I'll take the roll of the commissioners who are here in our small hearing room for today's hearing. Commissioner Partridge.
Here.
Commissioner Hahn.
Here.
Commissioner Sullivan.
Here.
Commissioner Tuma.
Here.
And I'm Katie Sieben. A quorum is present and we have two items today. Christian, please introduce item number 1.
Good morning, Chair Sieben and Commissioners. Item number 1 is docket number E295, E112/SA-25-115, involving Princeton Public Utilities and East Central Energy in the matter of the joint request of Princeton Public Utilities and East Central Energy to modify electric service territory boundaries. The question before the commission is, should the commission approve the service territory transfer from the East Central Energy to Princeton Public Utilities? We have representatives from the Department of Commerce and East Central Energy available for questions. Staff have no additional comment.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Tuma.
Well, Madam Chair, I looked at everything. Everything looks perfectly fine, right to the record. What's interesting, though, I had one of my best high school buddies, Dougie Burns, came from Princeton. I always thought Princeton was like a highfalutin, like educated place, but it's actually named after John S. Prince, who was a grunt surveyor back in the 1870s. They would name townships after each other, and so we got named Princeton after John S. Prince, but he wasn't always a grunt. He actually went on to be mayor of St. Paul and the president of one of our banks. So, so it was not just a.
Did he ever serve on our commission?
He did not. I did check, but he did not. But everything looks fine. So, Madam Chair, I move that the commission approve the joint request for the agreed upon permanent boundary change from East Central Energy to Princeton Public Utilities, and request that Mingeo update their service territory maps to reflect that agreement.
Is there any discussion of Commissioner Tuma's motion? All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, the motion prevails. Item number 2, Ms. Ricker.
Good morning, Chair Sieben and Commissioners. Item number 2 is docket number 015/RP-25127 in the matter of Ministry of Power's application for approval of its 2025-2039 integrated resource plan. The questions before the commission are, should the commission require Minnesota Power to include a bill insert and/or electronic? Oh, my mic has been off this whole time.
Oh, I didn't notice. Okay.
Jeff just fixed it for me. I'll start again.
Okay. We could hear you, but for the tape, you should probably just make sure.
It's all messed up now.
This is my first time introducing an item, so that's my
Really? Oh, well, congratulations, I think. You are.
Good morning, Chair Sieben and Commissioners. Item number 2 is docket number E015/RP-25127 in the matter of Minnesota Power's application for approval of its 2025 to 2039 integrated resource plan. The questions before the commission are, should the commission require Minnesota Power to include a bill insert and/or electronic notice to customers regarding public input in its IRP? Should the commission order one or more public meetings on this matter? And should the commission take any other actions related to soliciting public input? The only new material documents that have been filed since briefing papers were published are additional appendices to the resource plan filed by the company on Monday, March 31st, and a letter from Great Plains Institute and a statement from Commissioner Partridge, both filed this morning. I have no further remarks, but am available for questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll start with Commissioner Partridge.
Thank you, Chair Sieben. So as I filed onto the record, in my previous employment with Center for Energy and Environment, I was a subcontractor to the Great Plains Institute and a neutral third-party advisor and facilitator to the stakeholder engagement process for Minnesota Power's 2025-2039 Integrated Resource Plan. That process was led by the Great Plains Institute. In that role, I provided advice and guidance to Minnesota Power and the Great Plains Institute on procedural issues, including meeting agendas, engaging speakers, identifying publicly available resources for educating stakeholders on resource planning and related issues, and assisting with stakeholder outreach. Through that role, I was not privy to any information that is not available to the general public in the March 31st, 2025 filing, Appendix N specifically, and I was not privy to any information or discussions about the company's resource selection or decision-making, including what types of resources were included in the modeling results, or how the company evaluated and chose resource options. I did not author or read the stakeholder engagement report prior to its submission. I also did not review the final societal benefit cost analysis template or completed societal benefit cost analyses. None of these activities resulted in a preferential treatment to any person or entity or caused a loss in my ability to make an independent and impartial decision on the current matter. Thank you, Chair Sieben.
Thank you, Commissioner Partridge. I think the question then that we should now ask is does any party here object to the statement that Commissioner Partridge made, or think that the commission should take any action that's contrary to what was just said or filed last night? I don't hear anything. So I think then we can just move ahead and move on to the docket. So the questions before us today are, as Ms. Ricker said, should we have a bill insert, and kind of what process should we use to ensure that public participation is robust and covered in the IRP? And I'll start first with the company, and Ms. Kukelka, please identify yourself for the record, and then if the department is here and wants to come forward, we'll start with appearances. Please state that your name and the organization you're representing, Ms. Kukelka.
Thank you, Chair Sieben. Jennifer Kuklenski with Minnesota Power.
Sorry, I screwed up your
It's
name
a hard
again.
one.
And Dr. Lieb.
Good morning, Sydney Lieb with the Minnesota Department of Commerce.
Ms. Kuklenski, I appreciate, first I want to just establish that I know you filed your IRP, the majority of it on March 1st, and then the additional appendices came in this week. But will you just please confirm for the commission that now you have filed everything as required by statute?
Thank you, Chair Sieben and Commissioners. I can confirm that Minnesota Power has filed everything required per statute.
Great. And this is like our first look at what you filed, and the briefing papers, I think, adequately cover what the company is proposing, and we're not really getting into like what resource selection is at this point or is not. But I just wondered if you could comment first on the relationship to the IRP that you filed and to the acquisition docket that's in front of the commission. And the rationale for me asking this question is, as you know, when the commission first had a hearing on the acquisition, the company said that the acquisition was necessary to fund the clean energy transition. And then when I saw the IRP that was filed, high level, there's a lot of fossil resources that are in your proposal for new generation or the refueling. And I wondered if you could please comment on how you see those two dockets fitting together, or how you see they are consistent with one another in terms of the company's need to build more resources in the 5-year action plan as outlined in your resource plan.
Thank you, Chair Sieben, for the question. What I can share is that this resource plan was developed and filed or proposed for the commission to review solely based on Minnesota Power's need and Minnesota Power customers' need, and largely the fossil fuel replacement that you see in the plan is in response to seizing coal at Boswell Unit 3 by 2030 and Boswell Unit 4 by 2035. And so with regard to the acquisition proceeding that is happening simultaneously, there is no connection. And I'm happy to answer further questions if you want more clarification, but the partners who have proposed to purchase Elite and its businesses, including Minnesota Power, have a consent right to the IRP per the merger agreement. And the partners exercise that consent right by reviewing section 2 in the IRP, which is the executive summary, and nothing more. There was no input provided, and actually they didn't even change one word in that executive summary. So there was no correlation with the resources that were selected in the 2025 IRP as filed with the simultaneous proceeding on the company's acquisition.
And sorry, because I don't understand, maybe because I'm not a lawyer, what is a consent right? What does that mean?
So they had the right to review, and it's my understanding if they had potentially wanted to provide input, small amounts of input they could, but what I will share is that the partners did not see the plan or that section of the plan until about a week before we filed. So it was not that they were going to be exercising decision-making in the IRP.
And so whatever decisions this commission makes on your IRP, it's your position, or I think what you just said, that whatever happens with the acquisition is independent of the resource selection choices that the commission will make in the integrated resource plan?
It is. Yes,
And
Chair Stevens.
I know that is part of the evidentiary hearings that have been going on. There's been discussion of approximately, I was like in and out of it and reviewed some of the testimony, but there's roughly $5 billion in investment that's needed for Minnesota Power. Is that in the 5-year plan that's outlined here in the IRP? I know that it's not all resource selection, that some of it includes transmission that's not specifically in this IRP, but can you give us a context or a dollar amount, if you have a rough number, of the resources needed for your resource plan, or the dollar amount of invested needed for the 5-year action plan?
Thank you, Chair Sieben. I will say that I'm not prepared with the actual dollar amount associated with the 5-year plan. We did file projected rate impacts in the IRP for the 5-year plan. And what I'll say is that that also includes continuing the actions that were approved in our previous IRP for the 2021 IRP. And so that's why I don't actually have the final dollar amount, but I could get it and provide it to the commission. But the 500 billion, it's my understanding.
5 billion.
Excuse me, 5 billion, my understanding would be associated with long-term capital investments and not solely associated with the 5-year plan.
Okay, and I know we could go on a lot of questions in this area, but one just like general concern that I have is the conversion of I understand ceasing coal at Boswell by 2035, and the conversion perhaps to gas as a new fuel source, but adding 750 megawatts of additional natural gas by 2035 sounds to me like that's new gas facilities that would be proposed. Most likely that's just 5 years before 2040, which, as you know, is really a critical point for Minnesota energy law, in that the state has indicated that we should move away from such carbon intensive or fossil generation by that point. How do you think we should, just at these beginning stages, like think about the 2040 law in relation to the proposed addition of 750 megawatts of new natural gas?
Thank you, Chair Sieben. So what I will share is Minnesota Power has approximately 1,000 megawatts of baseload generation that's currently, the need is currently fulfilled at Boswell with coal generation. And so in this IRP was really challenging. There were a lot of opportunities also associated with this IRP, but challenging to replace that level of coal generation without some other reliable technology, and that can generate at all hours of the day. And so the 1,000 megawatts that you see in the briefing papers is associated with both the short and long-term plan, but the 750 megawatts of natural gas, it would be new natural gas, but it would be associated with the long-term plan based on electricity load projections today. And so what I would say is the company, while we would like, the short and long-term plan approved as proposed, of course, there's more uncertainty associated with that 750 megawatts. So I'll start there. And then to address your question about the state's carbon-free electricity goals,
Law.
or mandate. The company understands that the statute requires us to procure by 2039, which is ahead of that 100% mandate. So we understand we still have a bit to go in our next IRP. But by 2039, at the end of this plan, we will have to have 90% carbon-free energy, right? Energy procured from a carbon-free source that's approved under the statute to match our retail electric sales. So it's not that this plan will result in a total carbon-free MP system because we don't have the reliable technology that is affordable at this point. And so the company is excited that this plan does get us to meeting that state statute of 90% carbon-free electricity for Minnesota Power customers by 2039.
And I understand like the overall, you're looking at as a system-wide, you're measuring your carbon against like a system-wide overall goal. But it also seems to me that given the uncertainty that's in the economy right now, that's not going too far afield here, I don't think, but that tariffs that are just announced and imposed on steel and aluminum and the impact that it could have on prices for new facilities, coupled with the increased energy demand we're seeing nationally, it's likely that REC prices are going to continue to rise too. And I'm curious if your plan accounts for the and I know there are different load forecasts for your company included in your plan, but did you also account for are you still going to need to also purchase RECs if you proceed and get approval for adding 750 megawatts of new gas?
Thank you, Chair Sieben. This plan is not a REC purchase plan. So this plan will put Minnesota Power, if approved, on a path to generate the amount of carbon-free electricity that it needs to serve its customers on its own. Now, of course, there are always situations that could arise, or if projects couldn't get built in time, REC purchases could be necessary, but the company has not put forward a plan that factors in REC purchases. It's a plan that allows us to produce the amount of energy needed to meet the carbon-free statute.
Okay, that's helpful to know. And I know Commissioner Sullivan had a follow-up, and then Commissioner Hunt.
Thank you, and thanks for testimony today. I guess I'm glad that Commissioner Sieben raised this point because it's certainly on my mind. And I mean, I'm just doing my own back of the envelope, with a, piece of paper and pencil. But my understanding is that in the record, this would be a a combustion cycle unit. And combustion cycle units, obviously, they don't run like CTs. They run pretty regularly. It is more likely than not, it's going to be running at least 40%. I think that's about the fleet-wide average in Minnesota is that CC's running about 40%, but it's probably going to run more than that. 750 megawatt CC over the 8,760 hours of the year is going to, even if it's running at 40%, that's a lot of megawatt hours of carbon intensive energy. And it might fit within your load growth scenario, but I don't know how just the arithmetic can fit within a base case scenario. And maybe that's, I understand that's part of the discussion that we'll have. But I'm pretty worried that you're already looking at natural gas in that place. That it's going to be a pretty high hurdle for me to get over that. And certainly a CC that just economically, it's going to be a more expensive plant. Even though it'll generate power less expensively, it's got to generate a lot of megawatt hours to spread those costs out over. That's why it's less expensive per megawatt hour. It's just going to be a big block of energy that is going to be on your system that is not carbon free and may be consistent with the state statutes in 2035, but certainly not consistent with the state statutes in 24 when you absolutely would be looking to procure RECs. The price of RECs will very likely be higher than they are today. And then a future commission is going to be faced with a pretty ugly decision about what do we do with this unit. And I think that the company's position is going to be strongly, well, we need recovery. If this is a stranded asset, we need recovery. And you'll point to the statutes that say, it's policy-driven retirement. And I think that you could be setting yourselves up for a pretty bad situation in the out years in order to get through. And I'm not trying to put myself in your position because I recognize you have information and you are thinking through problems that are not before me right now. But I'm just telling you what is on the top of my mind, that you could be putting yourself and the state in a pretty bad position in 2040 to solve some inconvenient problems today, which I think will necessitate you being creative. I'm not saying that you're not creative, but I'm just saying automatically going to 750 megawatts of CC at Boswell, I don't think is what, I recognize there's a host community there, very important. And I recognize you want to reuse that site and that interconnection. But I'm telling the company right now, like, this is not what I think is in the public interest. I'll wait to see how the record develops though. But sorry.
No, Ms. Kukelka, I think Commissioner Sullivan picked up what I didn't, which is your response was you will be compliant in 2039 with the state's carbon laws under your plan. And this plan only goes through 2039. But can you speculate, have you run the model? Will you still be compliant or will you be needing RECs after we hit 2040?
Chair Sieben, Commissioner Sullivan, thank you for your comments. They are noted and understandable. Chair Sieben, to answer your question, the company did actually do, I would say we didn't run the models to the extent that we did to get to the end of the planning period in 2039, but did do some kind of foresight modeling to get to 100%. And if the company were to get there by generating its own electricity, like is presented in the 2025 IRP to get us to 2039, the cost was astronomical. So the company didn't go into exploring REC purchase alternatives. And at this time, our position is that getting to 2040 will be a challenge, but there's a lot of opportunities also associated with that. And we think the iterative planning process will allow us to get there. So we can't say that we can get to that point in 2040 yet. We do have that 10% to go, and we know that 10% is going to be maybe harder than some of the earlier percentage points, but we are committed to getting there, and we will continue in our iterative resource planning process to getting there in our next plan. So, we're kind of coming in with the cards on the table that we can't get to 2040 yet with the planning tools and resources that we have available right now, but that we have 15 years.
Can I just say, like, I understand you said 10%, but I just want to tell you what my back of the envelope math is. My back of the envelope math is your system's about a 9 million megawatt hour system, right? Somewhere in that range, 9, 10, 8, somewhere depending on large users. You're shaking your head. I think that's right.
Commissioner Sullivan, yeah, I would have to double check with our planners, but it sounds about right.
You're about 20% of the state. That's right in that range. A natural gas CC running at 40% capacity factor generates 3 million megawatt hours a year. So it's a big power plant. Like, what we know today is that's a third of your generation would be powered by that unit. And that, I could be wrong, and maybe your engineers back in Duluth are like, no, he's doing the arithmetic wrong. But that's what it tells me right now. So, like, the puzzle pieces are not fitting together in my brain. Just granted, I don't have all the information, but I just want you to know that.
But I think the general point you raise, and that builds off of what I was trying to say at the beginning less articulately than you did, Commissioner Sullivan, was that the company's asking us to acquire or to allow them to build a new generating facility that's 750 megawatts that isn't just going to run until 2039. Like, that would be imprudent for us to say it can only be built and run until 2039, when then you have these, this law that's.
I mean, they could pay it all off. They could depreciate it over 5 years, but I don't think the ratepayers and large users would like that.
Right. I don't think we would
Yeah.
allow that. So anyway, sorry to take over your question, but Commissioner Hahn.
Thank you. Chair Sieben. I don't know whether you were here when we are approving your HVDC certificate of need proceeding, and then Minnesota Power asked incremental portion of that being approved. And I think I had a quarrel with the Commissioner Tuma, not to put on condition on it. The reason is because I know that you need a base load. HVDC is a playing base load. And exactly that incremental portion I was hoping is replacing Boswell capacity. Now I think MP is asking additional base load using combined cycle. That doesn't make any sense to me. I think this will revisit that potential cost recovery of your HVDC, the incremental portion of it, because now you're asking two different things with two different reasons. That's why I can agree that, yeah, you may be able to meet the need to comply with the carbon-free standard because you can use that HVDC line to import a lot of energy. That means you are heavily using that CC unit for the MISO wholesale market for the revenue, not for the retail customer. So I think we need to develop the record clearly on this one to make sure that how that HVDC line will be used to meet your baseload need, and then whether the 40% capacity factor even might be not the answer anymore because LMPs keep going down due to the renewable energy. You may need a 60% capacity factor to make a break even for that capacity. So that's why it is very unusual to ask for the combined cycle. If you are doing it for reliability, I can understand, but for the economics, I don't know whether it can make any economic sense given that you have a HVDC with significant extra capacity addition to it with the existing capacity of 500 or 550. Now you are getting all the way up to potentially 1,500, right? That HVDC line.
Chair Steven, Commissioner Hom, thank you for the question. So yes, well, The line itself, so what was approved in the certificate of need would get the line to 900 megawatts. Actually, the part that gets the line from 550 to 900 is a separate interconnection or a separate like line upgrade project that's not included in the HVDC modernization certificate of need. However, the HVDC modernization certificate of need did include building the new converter stations in a way that would allow, if the line were upgraded in the future, to transport up to 1,500 megawatts. So yes, that's correct. And what I'll say is that this IRP does call for a significant amount of new wind resource additions that the HVDC line could potentially support.
No, I mean, that's why I don't disagree with you that company has a plan to meet the clean carbon-free standard. But in that case, if you are meeting that carbon-free standard, what's the energy that combined cycle will produce? So mostly those will be used for the wholesale market because you are meeting your standard without buying the rack and you are using your own renewables. So potential there is a time mismatch. That means, to me, I think that doesn't make a lot of good math unless you really go into the model to see what's the potential outcome from it. So originally I came here to ask a department and the company to work together to make sure that we have a good modeling from the department, because recent Excel ILP case, I was very surprised that company was not providing complete information, so department wasn't able to replicate some of those outcomes. I had a serious concern about it, so I was going to give a heads up and a warning to the company if department cannot replicate your model. To me, that's the end of the discussion of the whole ILP, and I think we need to revisit that issue very seriously for the companies. Any company submitting ILP, department at the minimum should be able to replicate your model. And without that, I don't think we can do anything here rationally, given that our back of envelope math doesn't make any sense of your proposal. And then outcome is very obvious in that case. That's why I was hoping that department and then company work together, and then other intervener who is willing to run the model to have a good communication to making sure that they have a good input from you so they can replicate your model and they can do their work. So do I get your commitment that company is going to work with the department and any other intervener to making sure that they cannot come here and say, oh yeah, we were not able to do it because we didn't get the complete package from the company?
Chair Sieben, Commissioner Hom, yes, the company is committed to working fully with the department on modeling and has actually already provided the department with all of the modeling information.
Okay, so can I ask?
Yeah.
If the department, can you give us a quick heads up if you cannot replicate the model? Because we do not want to wait until decision-making process and hearing from departments saying, yeah, we cannot run the model because we didn't get the complete model.
Chair Sieben, Commissioner Hom. Yes, the department intends to do robust review of the model and similarly review whether there are resource alternatives to avoid the gas. I think the department shares many of the concerns that have been raised, that even if the system's compliant in 2039, if it's not compliant in 2040, those gas resources are going to be a significant stranded asset that risk a significant unraveling of the regulatory compact if the utilities are going to continue to invest in fossil resources. We note that we reviewed the filing already, and as it was outlined, the company's admitting that in 2040, they believe there's going to be significant costs to comply. But the department feels that's because the utilities are short-sighted and unwilling to invest in new technologies that allow for clean, firm resources to come on the system. Utilities made very similar arguments against renewables in the early 90s that the costs would not come down. Policymakers forced those investments and the cost came down. Until utilities are forced to make investments in these new and emerging technologies, the system is going to continue to build gas.
Okay, thank you. And the one additional item I was going to mention was, okay, load forecasting can be a very significant issue because companies now claiming that there is a potential growth and double the company load, which is, I think, good news for the company. I hope that happens. But also, if it doesn't happen, somebody has to pay for it. And then that means the remaining customer has to pay for it. So I think doubling the system is not an easy thing to do without fully vetting that information and that what is going behind that information. Because I understand that it's possible if you sign up with some data center, but your goal and aspiration is not necessarily actual load growth. And because ratepayer has to bear that risk if he approve it here. So that means we have to really, really vet the load forecasting, because otherwise I think we can get in significant issue. And then one additional issue with the load forecasting is recently there was an announcement by the mining company on their layoff and shutting down operation indefinitely. That's why I think MP load forecasting itself is very challenging because of that large industrial customers up and down. So given that and adding this new load growth issue is a very significant challenging issue. Hopefully, once again, company and department work together so we don't have an argument that company didn't provide information so we cannot replicate it or we cannot do it.
Ms. Kuklinski, can you comment on the load forecast? And I know you have 3 different scenarios in the IRP. And then sorry, I just don't remember. Did you pick the middle, your base case scenario is seeing load growth relatively flat, or did you pick one of the other ones?
Chair Sieben, and Commissioner Hom, thank you for the comments. And Chair Sieben, to address your question, it is the relatively flat, I should say, load forecast that makes up the base case. There's also a scenario with a decline in load, and there is the growth plan, if you will, that has the growth scenario in the event that significant new load were to come onto MP's system. But those actions would only happen if the load were to show up. The base case is where you're seeing kind of that the short-term plan and then the first part of the long-term plan.
And how do the layoffs of I know the mines are they're temporary perhaps, but how should the commission think about the extreme uncertainty surrounding industry in your service territory in relation to what we're seeing in your IRP?
Thank you, Chair Sieben, for the question. I think it's not that unique to what Minnesota Power has experienced in the past. So as you all know, our system is unique and our load factor is unique. And we also have experienced kind of the cyclicals of the economy's, cycles. And so this plan factors in potential ups and downs like every prior IRP that Minnesota Power has submitted in recent years, because we do understand with the types of customers that we primarily serve that there could be ups and downs in that.
And does your base scenario then take into account the decline in mining that was already announced, or was that developed before is it Mintac and what's the other line? The other mine that's a temporary reprieve or temporary shutdown, the 600 workers that were laid off. Was that already taken into account when you filed your load scenario here?
Chair Sieben, it was not. So that was announced after we actually had filed the initial IRP. So the company didn't do any additional modeling work or anything from after March 3rd. We just didn't have all of the kind of supporting appendices finalized. And so that's why we had a supplemental filing earlier this week, but it did not account for that. It didn't account for that specific situation, but it does account for potential load decreases.
So Hibbing, Taconite, and Menorca, thank you to our staff for reminding me of the mines that were closed. So what I heard is the supplemental filing does account for that.
No,
No, it does
Stephen,
not.
it does not. The 2025 IRP does not account for that specific situation, but I would say that all of our IRPs account for that possibility because it's not something that's new that for us
Right.
to experience.
But how should the commission, do you think there should be an updated, or maybe I should ask the department, given the relative uncertainty of the iron ore facilities right now, and who knows what will happen as a result of the announced tariffs in the coming weeks even, or do you think there should be any supplemental filing or update? We certainly don't want to unnecessarily delay making decisions here because the company needs to plan for acquisition of new resources, obviously. But how do you think it feels like I know this is always like, as MP says, like this happens, but this feels like it's a very potential big disruption. And do you have any thoughts about supplemental filings or other things we could ask the company to file that would be particularly helpful for the department to be able to not only replicate their model, but do accurate load forecasting to help us make good decisions?
Sure, Chair Sieben, we appreciate the question. This is a significant source of uncertainty in a load forecast that already has a lot of uncertainty because it's our understanding a lot of the load growth is coming from data centers, which are highly speculative to begin with. I think one thing we could do is either the department work with the company or just have the company file an additional sensitivity on their load forecast to show what would happen if one or two of those customers either decreased operation substantially or came off the system. I would note, though, that if that were to occur, it would probably send reverberations across things for the company beyond just the IRP. Probably the first thing we would need to deal with would be some sort of emergency rate case. So I think this is one place where this is going to be an issue, but it would be a significant challenge across the full regulatory scope of the company. So we could definitely look at some sensitivities in the forecast, and that might be the best way to do some sort of supplemental filing. I would also hope that we maybe have a little bit better certainty on what the overall impact of the tariffs will be in 3 to 6 months to see if they may not be there within a few days. We'll have to see how things play out politically.
Commissioner Hom.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Sieben. I just checked your ILP. There is a 200 megawatt decreasing sensitivity analysis. So that's what you meant, that you are always including those. So I know that it's a very sensitive information. You cannot rebuild the actual capacity of those load, but can you say whether these 200 megawatt sensitivity can cover those two announced layoff and shutting down operation of those two mining? Or do we have to consider other scenario beyond that?
Chair Sieben, Commissioner Hom, I don't want to speak to exact numbers because I honestly don't know them. Since that announcement has been made, the company has responded immediately and is working to evaluate the impact. But that 200 megawatt sensitivity load decline wouldn't have encompassed that exact amount because it wasn't announced. We weren't aware of it when that sensitivity was built in, but that is an example of the types of sensitivities that our modeling team adds into our IRP analyses because we are utility that experiences kind of the cyclical nature of industrial economies.
Yeah, thank you. So that's why I was asking whether it's big enough to cover that sensitivity is big enough to cover these two announced load decline. And then we may not need to develop the new sensitivity unless there is other information from this new announcement of the tariff has a negative impact to you guys. So that's why I think that we may not need to slow it whole process down if we can utilize that sensitivity as one of the case.
Chair Sieben, Commissioner Hom, if I can respond, I would agree with that. I think that sensitivity built in, actually, I think the company feels comfortable with the IRP despite that announcement because of that sensitivity. And I would agree with Dr. Lieb that we could potentially work with the department on maybe what those sensitivities could or should be given what develops in the next few months. And we are absolutely open to doing that.
Thank you.
And Ms. Kuklinski, I'm sure you'd be amenable to if there is a big change, like you will tell us too, that we will either working with a department or through staff IRs or some other means, if there are other big economic impacts to the range because of whatever situation, you will always file information either in this docket or, as Dr. Lieb said, like there may be other impacts, and you have the ability to tell us when there's big changes, and you will do that, obviously, I assume.
Chair Sieben, yes, we would. And you know, we understand as well as anyone that we're in sort of unprecedented times here, not in the sense that we don't experience those cyclical natures of the industrial economy in northern Minnesota, but just in a policy environment, times are a little bit different. And so we are committed to updating the commission. We're committed to working with the department. And we've put forward a plan that we hope is somewhat responsive in that it's adaptable to an extent if there were big changes.
The thing that I'm beating a dead horse here, but I'm allowed to do that sometime, I guess, because I have this job, is like, I just want to say that picking up on, I know the acquisition is a really big deal to the entire state of Minnesota, certainly to your customers and to your workers. And the main messaging I got from when you made that announcement and came before the commission was that it was needed to fund the clean energy transition. And then I look at this plan and it seems contrary to that messaging. And so I hope that the company will continue to work with stakeholders and especially the department on looking at if you can economically find other ways to lessen the amount of fossil resources in your IRP so that over the long run, for the good of your customers and northern Minnesota, we find a fit that works for the reliability of your system, but also for ratepayers. And, I know they're not directly connected, but both are discussing these same investments and the future of Minnesota Power. And I just want to reemphasize that we are all like watching both dockets very, very carefully and are invested in ensuring that you have a good outcome in both of these dockets. So that's the last I'll say about that for right now. Commissioner Partridge.
Thank you, Chair Sieben. I have a follow-up question related to that, and this is for Ms. Kuklinski. Sorry, we are just all over your name today. I apologize. So my question for you is, given that it sounds like the acquisition, though they're happening in parallel procedurally, came at a moment that it did not influence the IRP. So my question to you is, had the IRP been a year later, had the acquisition been either denied or approved, do you think that the IRP would look different based on, exactly what Chair Sieben said, that the announcement that came out was, this is going to allow for capital that's required for the clean energy transition, if that acquisition, were approved per se or denied, and you then had to start your IRP, do you think that it could be different depending on the decision in an acquisition docket?
Chair Sieben, Commissioner Partridge, thank you for the question. I do not think that it would look any different. The consent right for the acquisition partners largely serves in the capacity that Elite's current board does now. So the current board has a right essentially to review the IRP, but makes in my experience, no recommended changes. So I would not expect it to be any different if it had been filed a year from now based on the acquisition. Maybe it would look different if filed a year from now based on the policy landscape or the economic landscape. But it would not have looked any different.
Commissioner Hahn.
Thank you, Chair Sivan. I know it's not fair question to you, but MISO load forecasting reporting deadline is November 1st for the incoming planning resource auction. So this announcement came after that. And also I know that there is a must-take requirement for these customers. So what portion of the incoming planning year Minnesota Power customer has to shore up this going away load?
Chair Stephen, Commissioner Hum, I don't think I'm prepared to answer that question today. I think I would need our planners and kind of our MISO subject matter experts with me, but I can take that question back.
And also, I don't know, I just quickly reviewed their BPM and then tariff, and so I cannot say for sure, but I don't know whether there is any way you can update your load forecasting, because PRA, I think auction window is still open or it's not open yet. I think I just saw email a few days ago. So if there is a possibility, updating is one of the best answer to it, but still, I think if you cannot update it, and I know that these guys has to give you 3 months or 6 months ahead notification. Yeah, under the ESA. Yeah, ESA has that notification ahead, and they have must take requirements, so they have to pay for it for the capacity portion. So what portion of the capacity month, I think other ratepayer has to bear the burden of it. I think, yeah, it'll show up in the rate case or some other proceeding, but I think fixing at the MISO side is the best if you can, because you can sell that capacity and then recoup some of those money for the remaining customers.
Commissioner Sullivan.
I want to beat a dead horse since you started, and I have that prerogative, and I'm sorry that you are going to take the brunt of it here, but you just, in answering Commissioner Partridge's question, the way that I internalized that was that this is the way it's got to be. Like, doesn't change. This is the way it's got to be. And maybe that's unfair of me to say, but like what I have been hoping, and I hope that it evolves to this, it develops towards this, is that, and I know utilities don't like to be compared with other utilities because you're all unique flowers. But when I look at what is going on with Sherco at Becker, at a very important power plant, and what they're doing at that hub is innovative and creative. And you have transmission lines that are interconnecting there. You have large solar facilities that are being added there. You have storage that's being added there. You have a lot of data centers that publicly are interested in locating there because it is becoming an energy hub. And obviously they have a nuclear power plant there that is different than the situation that you find yourself in. But when you look at what's happening in the Northland as well, we have the HVDC line that's coming in. We have MISO LRTP, the Tranche 1 line that we just approved. I have no doubt there will be additional LRTP lines that come through. I was hoping to see something on the first cut that looked more along the lines of like what an energy hub is. But when I look at what the plan is right here, we're going to do, basically, we're going to replace Boswell 3 and 4 with a unit that's basically the same, but it has lower carbon emissions, but is still a significant carbonly intensive resource. We'll do a little bit of stuff kind of on the margins, but it's not the same. I was hoping to see something with the first draft that was more in line with what I think of is happening at Becker. And I hope that it iterates towards that. And I am telling you that I will absolutely follow the docket and follow the record and where things develop towards. And that is my charge as a commissioner, and that's what I'm authorized to do under the state statutes. But I also want the company to know, like, I think that this commission is very pragmatic. I mean, we ordered a CT in Excel's last resource plan. Like, I don't want to order resources that have questions within our clean energy framework here. So anyways, I'm just gonna beat the dead horse. I know we've all been saying, I'm sure that you guys I know you're taking this all, but I'm really hoping that the company goes back and thinks it through some more. So that's all I wanted to say. If you want to say anything more, I don't want to, I mean, yeah.
Madam Chair, I do remember though, just not to praise Excel too much, it started out with a CC unit at Becker. Okay. And
True.
we had to kill a lot of horses between.
That is true.
that
You are right
and
about that.
Where we got.
You are right about that. And you're right. And you are right about that. I did say iterate. I covered towards it, but you are right. You're right. And that's fair.
Okay, well, the question before us or the decision options before us are pretty clear right now. I'd move decision options 1, 2, 3, and 4, all parts. Does anyone want to add anything or modify those? Or any discussion of them? All in favor of my motion, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, the motion prevails. Thank you very much, everyone. There's no other business before the commission, so we are adjourned. My nice gavel.